Rome feared foreign armies, treacherous generals, and gods who punished arrogance. But its darkest terror came from a single man inside the palace, an emperor who turned dignity into a weapon, families into property, and suffering into a state-approved ritual. This is the chapter of Roman history they tried hardest to erase. Power in Rome was never just built through marble monuments or victorious legions. Sometimes it whispered through locked doors, hid in the shadows of torchlit corridors, and crept quietly into the homes of senators who once believed themselves untouchable. Under Caligula, power stopped being a symbol and became a blade, one sharpened on humiliation, ritual, and fear. Gaius Julius Caesar, Germanicus, Caligula, was not born a monster. Rome loved him. As a child in miniature military boots, adored by the legions, he walked beside his father Germanicus through the Rhine camps, as if destiny had already wrapped him in imperial purple. Citizens cheered him, soldiers blessed him, poets praised him. Rome saw in him a future hero. But Rome never imagined the man he would become. His childhood was shaped by death disguised as honor. His father likely poisoned, his mother exiled, his brothers eliminated. Caligula survived by pretending to be harmless. Those years under Tiberius taught him the most important principle of Roman power. To live, you must learn deception. To rule, you must perfect it. When he finally rose to the throne, he played the role flawlessly. He restored voting assemblies, lowered taxes, released prisoners, repaired aqueducts, revived festivals, and appeared among the people with a smile that looked like hope. Rome celebrated for 100 days. Flowers carpeted the streets. Children chanted his name. Senators unclenched their fists for the first time in years. For a brief moment, Rome believed the gods had sent them salvation. But salvation lasted only until the emperor became deathly ill. His fever burned so violently that court physicians feared his brain would cook inside his skull. He convulsed. He raved. He claimed divine visions. Rome prayed, sacrificing endlessly at temples for his life. And then, miraculously, he rose from his bed. But the man who opened his eyes was not the man Rome had crowned. Something in him had cracked. His pupils were too wide. His voice carried strange rhythms. He walked at night like a spirit searching for something invisible. The illness didn't kill him, but it killed the last fragments of restraint inside him. And from that moment forward, Caligula stopped pretending to be human. It began in whispers, strange commands, obsessive rituals, sudden bursts of fury. Then he turned toward the women closest to him. His sisters, Drusilla, Julia Livilla, Agrippina, became objects of fixation, symbols of power twisted into something grotesque. Drusilla, his favorite, was elevated like a goddess, seated beside him as though she were his divine partner. When she died, he shattered. He forbade laughter in Rome. Anyone caught smiling-faced execution, his mourning was not love, it was possession. With Drusilla gone, his hunger turned outward. He wanted control not only over Rome's laws, but over Rome's families, their daughters, their bloodlines, their dignity. What began as personal depravity rapidly evolved into something Rome had never seen: a structured, state-engineered system built on domination. Caligula forced senators to bring their wives to the palace for inspection. Noble women were ordered to perform intimate acts with political rivals, while Caligula sat above them on a gilded throne, reviewing the spectacle like a judge overseeing a ritual. These acts were recorded by scribes, names, positions, responses, all preserved in wax tablets. Those records became political chains. A senator who complied too eagerly became a puppet. A senator who hesitated found his young son taken. A senator who complained found his wife summoned again and again until silence became his only defense. Senator Cornelius famously resisted. Caligula demanded his wife, Livia. Cornelius said no. The next morning, his 8-year-old son was found mutilated on the Senate steps. Cornelius delivered Livia to the palace the same afternoon. Rome understood then. This was not lust, this was policy. Caligula built an entire apparatus around his new ideology. He reorganized palace rooms into a mock temple complex. The Chamber of Venus for rituals involving noble women. The Hall of Priapus for orchestrated humiliation. The Room of Jupiter, where Caligula played the god he believed himself to be. He commissioned frescoes and mosaics, depicting myths twisted into justifications for his acts. He built corridors designed specifically for processions of women. He even introduced an official calendar of divine nights when senators were required to attend ceremonies wearing prescribed clothing, holding assigned torches, offering their daughters like sacred tributes. These were not orgies. They were administrative ceremonies. Physicians were ordered to examine women and girls for fertility. Midwives documented pregnancy attempts, miscarriages, and outcomes. Clerks maintained ledgers detailing every participant. Guards escorted victims to chambers according to strict timetables. Rome had become a machine. Not a machine of governance, but a machine of systematic degradation. Caligula expanded the system with a cold, bureaucratic efficiency. He created a breeding program, selecting women from elite families to bear children he declared divinely conceived. These children were taken at birth and raised in the palace. Fathers were forced to acknowledge them as their heirs. The Senate passed decrees legitimizing every decree Caligula ordered, even ones that contradicted Roman values so deeply that senators wept in private. But it didn't end with women. Caligula turned his attention toward noble boys. He ordered aristocratic sons to be dressed in saffron robes, painted their faces, and trained them to walk with the grace he demanded. These boys were paraded at banquets, where senators were forced to applaud their emasculated children. Rome's ancient values, dignity, masculinity, family lineage, were shredded before their eyes. And no one could speak. The Praetorian Guard enforced everything. Their loyalty was purchased with privilege and with fear. They ensured no senator interrupted rituals, no girl tried to escape, no father attempted rebellion. Behind sealed doors they participated freely, rewarded with access to victims after the emperor was finished. The palace became a labyrinth of suffering. Scribes logged every detail: age, hair color, body type, emotional response, resistance level, duration, number of participants, guards present, payments collected. Atrocity had become paperwork, organized, categorized, preserved. But the most chilling part was not the violence itself. It was that after a while, Rome adjusted. Families learned what times to avoid the palace corridors. Mothers learned how to disguise fear when Caligula entered a room. Senators learned how to smile while their souls were breaking. Victims learned how to breathe silently to avoid punishment. Slaves learned the new schedule before they learned the new emperor's moods. Rome reshaped itself around the emperor's depravity. Some nights became full-scale spectacles, events so elaborately planned that they looked less like cruelty and more like state festivals. Caligula selected full moons for these ceremonies, believing the lunar glow made the suffering more divine. The palace amphitheater was transformed into a sacred arena, decorated with torches, incense burners, and statues of gods whose myths Caligula distorted into justifications for his own desires. Participants were chosen like instruments in an orchestra. Gladiators known for brutality, foreign captives with unusual features, noble women from old bloodlines, even trained animals imported from Africa and Asia. Their roles were predetermined, their movements directed, their expressions controlled by threats. It was not a gathering. It was a performance, a ritual written by Cruelty and performed by those with no way to refuse. Senators watched from above, wearing their dignified togas while their dignity itself was stripped away. Their hands trembled under the folds of their robes as they looked down upon scenes they could neither stop nor acknowledge. If a father cried, he died. If he closed his eyes, he died. If he showed disgust at what happened to his daughter, he died. Caligula presided over the spectacle like a conductor, holding a gilded staff and giving commands with small gestures. Nothing happened unless he allowed it. Everything happened because he wanted it. And as horrifying as these nights were, they exposed only the surface of what was happening behind the palace walls. Outside the palace, a shadow economy blossomed, an entire black market built around the suffering of Rome's elite. Apothecaries sold salves for wounds and herbal drafts to numb the body. Secret midwives offered abortive mixtures to young women, terrified of carrying imperial pregnancies. Smugglers trafficked letters, messages, even locks of hair between families, too afraid to speak in public. Everyone who touched the system found profit in it. Some found opportunity. Some found survival. Some found corruption irresistible. Pain became currency. Silence became protection. Shame became tradition. Rome sank into a darkness it did not want to admit existed. Families attempted desperate strategies. Some mutilated their own daughters, cutting their hair, scarring their faces, starving them, hoping to make them undesirable. But Caligula simply declared these sacrifices of purity and used them anyway, claiming such imperfections made the rituals even holier. Others tried to hide girls in underground rooms or ship them to distant relatives. Informants, paid in gold, freedom, or access, quickly reported these attempts. Those families suffered twice, once for resisting, and then again for complying after resistance failed. The slaves of the palace witnessed more than anyone. Low-ranking servants swept the floors, carried linens, changed oil lamps, cleaned the chambers after rituals. They saw what the elite tried to forget. They heard the cries that the Senate pretended it could not hear. They carried out small acts of mercy, smuggling water, whispering warnings, hiding victims for a few minutes of safety. But their compassion was limited by the chains that bound them. One slave girl, Callista, became known among palace staff as the Silent Guardian. She would stay near the corridors during ceremonies, ready to pull unconscious victims aside before guards trampled them. Historians only know of her because her name appeared in 2 recovered palace logs, each time marked with the phrase, "Removed subject safely." That tiny phrase, buried in endless cruelty, is the closest thing to kindness documented in the entire system. And around all of this, around the screams, the rituals, the trembling families, Caligula wrote new laws to justify everything. He called the system a divine restoration. He claimed he acted on behalf of the gods. He told the Senate that Rome had grown weak and needed to be purified. And the Senate, broken and terrified, agreed. They passed decrees declaring every command of the emperor holy. They legalized the emperor's right to evaluate noble bloodlines. They made it a crime to refuse the emperor's summons. They even wrote that the emperor's body was sacred, and any union with him was an act of worship. It was the most horrific weapon of all. A crime disguised as religion. In one decree, Caligula ordered families to offer their daughters to him on their 12th birthday for a ceremony of Roman womanhood. And so, for years, Roman families delivered children who still slept with dolls into the hands of a man who viewed innocence as a tool for power. But Rome's suffering did not go unnoticed by Rome's gods, or so many believed. Strange omens began to appear: lightning splitting statues, fires erupting in temples, flocks of birds falling dead onto the streets. Priests warned that Jupiter himself was angry. Caligula laughed in their faces and declared that he, not Jupiter, ruled the skies. He ordered a bridge built from the palace to the temple of Jupiter and crossed it wearing a golden cape, demanding that priests bow before him. He called himself a god. He said he could rewrite fate. He said he owned the Roman world and everyone in it. And then his cruelty deepened further. He demanded that senators bring their daughters to dine with him, seating the girls beside him like ornaments. He ran his fingers through their hair as their mothers watched, frozen in place. He pulled the girls onto his lap during feasts and asked their fathers questions about politics, while the girls trembled silently against him. Every gesture was a threat. Every smile was a warning. Every banquet became an arena. Caligula turned Rome's daughters into tools, and their fathers into spectators of their own destruction. He even extended his cruelty into death. When victims died from exhaustion or injury, he demanded that their families thank him for elevating them to the gods. If they refused, they were executed. If they cried, they were punished. If they stayed silent, he punished them for ingratitude. Rome became a city where grief itself was a crime. But Rome was also a city of soldiers, and the soldiers, the Praetorian Guard, were watching. They acted as enforcers of the system, but they were also men with mothers, wives, sisters, daughters. They saw the emperor mock them. They saw him break the Senate, insult generals, steal wives, violate daughters, misuse army funds, and threaten campaigns that would surely destroy legions. Humiliation breeds hatred. And Caligula's greatest mistake was humiliating the wrong man. Cassius Chaerea, a Praetorian officer. Caligula mocked mercilessly. He insulted Chaerea daily, called him weak, ordered him to use feminine phrases when giving military commands, forced him to perform degrading tasks in public. Every joke Caligula made carved a crack deeper into Chaerea's spirit, until finally it broke. Caligula's insults toward Cassius Chaerea were not simple jokes. They were strategic humiliations. In front of soldiers, in front of senators, even in front of foreign ambassadors, Caligula mocked his voice, his posture, his masculinity. He forced Chaerea to use phrases like "kiss me" or "darling" when giving military orders, turning a seasoned officer into an object of laughter. Every jeer was a reminder that no rank, no honor, no years of service could shield a man from imperial cruelty. But humiliation, when repeated, becomes a seed, and inside Chaerea, that seed grew into something deadly. Whispers began among the Praetorian Guard, quiet at first, exchanged in torchlit corridors when the emperor had retired to his chambers. Soldiers who once obeyed Caligula now feared the next command, the next night ritual, the next demand to bring their own family members to the palace. Caligula had crossed too many lines. He had humiliated Rome, he had humiliated the Senate, and he had humiliated the very soldiers sworn to protect him. For the first time in his reign, the palace began to feel colder. Chaerea met secretly with fellow officers, Sabinus, Clemens, and others whose families had suffered under Caligula's decrees. They studied the palace schedule, learned the emperor's walking routes, and identified the one place where Caligula traveled with minimal escort: the narrow passage beneath the Palatine Hill that connected the palace to the theater. A corridor dark enough for betrayal. The plan was simple. The consequences would be catastrophic. But the men no longer cared. On the morning of January 24th, 41 CE, Caligula awoke in an unusually cheerful mood. He announced that a series of new divine games would begin that afternoon. Senators were already being assembled, girls dressed in ceremonial robes, guards stationed, scribes preparing their tablets. Caligula walked through the underground passageway, humming to himself. That was when Chaerea stepped forward. A single blow landed first, deep into Caligula's neck. The emperor gasped, shocked rather than angry. Then came more strikes. Blades tore through cloth, skin, and bone. Caligula fell backward, screaming not in pain but in disbelief. It was the one moment he realized the illusion of his godhood had shattered. More soldiers joined, stabbing again and again until the emperor's body stopped moving. Chaerea delivered the final cut. One aimed deliberately at Caligula's groin, symbolic revenge for the countless violations Caligula had inflicted upon Rome. The body of the emperor was left in the corridor, twisted, blood pooling across the stone tiles. The man who had claimed to be a god died in a place unfit even for a servant. Panic erupted across the palace. Some slaves fled, some hid, some prayed, some whispered that justice had finally come. But there was no justice for Caligula's family. His wife, Caesonia, was murdered shortly after. His young daughter, barely old enough to speak, was also killed to prevent any claim to the throne. Rome tried to erase the shame. Statues smashed, inscriptions scraped clean, coins melted. His name cursed in public forums. The Senate declared a damnatio memoriae, an official erasure from history. But Rome learned a terrible truth that day. You can kill a tyrant. You can burn his records. You can melt his statues. But you cannot erase the wounds he leaves on the people he ruled. Survivors carried their trauma into adulthood. Families carried their shame into silence. Children born from the emperor's rituals grew up without ever knowing their true origins. And long after the blood dried in the corridor where Caligula died, Rome continued to use many of the same legal tools he created. Because the cruelty of one man is terrible, but the cruelty of a system is eternal.